30 miles south of San Francisco sits one of California's most beautiful secrets, hidden among the Santa Cruz Mountains. Filoli encompasses 16 acres of formal gardens, a 54,000 square foot Georgian mansion, and 654 acres of pristine watershed land. Today, hundreds of thousands visit annually, wandering through garden rooms that evoke English country estates and marveling at interiors that Hollywood chose to represent ultimate wealth and power. But this was not always a place where strangers could enter. For nearly 6 decades, Filoli belonged to just 2 families, the Bournes and the Roths. The man who built it controlled the water flowing into every San Francisco home. He owned one of California's richest gold mines. By the time William Bowers Bourne II decided to create this estate, he had already amassed a fortune worth billions in today's currency. He had everything money could buy, everything except time. The story of Filoli is not simply about gardens and ballrooms. It is about a man who tried to build paradise while his body failed him, about a daughter who died an ocean away, about a wife who watched her family disappear, about the trust that saved what they created. 4 members of the Bourne family are buried on this property, not visible to the public tourists who walk the grounds. Before Filoli became a symbol of California's Golden Age, before it represented the last intact peninsula estate from that era, it was something else entirely. It was supposed to be a place to grow young. Instead, it became the place where an empire ended. William Bowers Bourne II never expected to inherit anything. He was 17 years old in 1875 when his mother summoned him home from Cambridge University. The telegram arrived without warning. His father's estate was collapsing, the family fortune evaporating. Come home immediately. The young man had been raised in luxury on San Francisco's Nob Hill, Wokan. His father, William Bourne Sr., had arrived in California during the gold rush with nothing and built an empire through mining, investments, banking, and insurance. The family lived like royalty, but something had gone catastrophically wrong. William Sr. had acquired the Empire Mine near Grass Valley in 1869. For a few years, it thrived. Then production dropped. Ore seemed to be running out. Water flooded deeper shafts. By 1874, the operation was barely profitable. That July, William Bourne Sr. died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his Nob Hill study. The coroner could not determine whether it was accident or intentional. His son was studying classics at Cambridge when it happened. The estate young William inherited was a disaster. His father's investments had been leveraged against each other. The mine was failing. Debts mounted. At 22 years old, William faced a choice. Let everything collapse or fight. He chose to fight. The mine still had something in it. William was certain. Most mining engineers believed you could not profitably work below 1,200 feet due to water seepage and prohibitive costs. William pushed deeper anyway, bringing in his cousin George Starr, a young man who understood mining technology. Together, they reorganized everything. New pumping systems, better drilling equipment, Cornish miners from England whose families had worked tin and copper mines for generations. These workers knew how to handle water and hard rock. For several years, the Empire Mine barely broke even. William kept pushing the shafts deeper. 1,500 feet, 1,800, 2,000. By 1884, it was profitable again. Over the next 4 decades, the Empire Mine would produce nearly 6 million ounces of gold, becoming one of the richest mines in California history. The young man called home from Cambridge had saved his family's fortune and built something even larger. But gold was not enough. In the 1890s, William turned his attention to something every growing city desperately needed: water. San Francisco's population was exploding. Natural springs and wells could not keep up. Private water companies fought brutal wars for control. By 1890, Spring Valley Water Company had emerged as the monopoly. William began buying shares. Spring Valley owned vast watersheds in San Mateo County and controlled Crystal Springs Reservoir. They possessed the power of eminent domain. allowing them to seize land and water rights for the public good while operating as a private profit-making enterprise. It was one of the most powerful monopolies in California. By 1900, William Bowers Bourne II was president. He controlled the water supply for hundreds of thousands of people, set the rates they paid, and decided where pipes would be laid and which neighborhoods would get service first. The arrangement made him spectacularly wealthy and spectacularly unpopular. San Francisco residents paid 24 cents per thousand gallons. Los Angeles, with city-owned water, paid 10 cents for the same amount. Newspapers ran cartoons depicting Spring Valley as an octopus strangling the city. Editorial writers called for public ownership. William did not particularly care what newspapers said. He believed private enterprise did things better than government. He ran Spring Valley Water Company efficiently. The infrastructure worked. The water flowed. But he knew the monopoly could not last forever. San Francisco was already planning an alternative. A massive project to dam the Hetch Hetchy Valley and pipe water over 160 miles from the Sierra Nevada. That project would take decades. In the meantime, William controlled something everyone needed. By 1914, William Bowers II was 57 years old. He had estates in San Francisco and at the Empire Mine. He owned Muckross House in Ireland. He had investments in gas, companies, banks, and real estate. He had everything a Gilded Age industrialist could want, except a country place near San Francisco where he could escape, entertain, and garden. Where, in his words, he could grow young. He found 654 acres in Woodside, at the southern end of Crystal Springs Reservoir. His own water company's land, the perfect location. He called his architect, Willis Polk, a man he had worked with before, a man who understood both grand statements and California practicality. The land sat on the eastern slope of the Santa Cruz Mountains, looking down toward a valley holding two massive reservoirs. Crystal Springs Reservoir was no accident of nature. Spring Valley Water Company had built it by damming creeks that once flowed freely to San Francisco Bay. William knew this land intimately. As president of Spring Valley, he had spent years overseeing the water system, walking these hillsides, studying the watershed. He knew where springs emerged and how water moved through the landscape. The site had everything: mature oak trees hundreds of years old, natural springs feeding creeks, southern exposure for gardens, views down to the reservoirs, 654 acres of privacy, and close enough to San Francisco to manage his business interests. 30 miles by automobile, an hour's drive on improving roads. The timing mattered. The earthquake and fires of 1906 had devastated San Francisco. The city felt dangerous and unpredictable. Wealthy families, who had lived exclusively in the city, began building country retreats on the peninsula. William was 57 when he started acquiring the Woodside parcels. His wife Agnes was 53. Their only surviving child, daughter Maud, was already married and living in Ireland at Muckross House, the spectacular estate William had purchased for her as a wedding gift. This would not be a house for raising children, but a place for the next phase of life: entertaining friends, hosting musical performances, gardening, living well. William had a life philosophy of 3 principles: fight for a just cause, love your fellow man, live a good life. He wanted a name for his estate that captured those ideals. Taking the first 2 letters from each word of his credo, he created an acronym: Phi from fight, Lo from love, Li from live. Filoli. The name meant something only to those who understood its origin. To everyone else, it was simply Italian-sounding and elegant. The site had one particular feature that fascinated him. Several creeks cut through the property, including one that marked the San Andreas Fault. The earthquake fault that had devastated San Francisco ran directly through his land. Most people would have seen that as a liability. William saw it as part of California's geology. The fault had been there for millions of years and would be there for millions more. You built carefully and accepted that this was earthquake country. The bigger concern was making the estate self-sufficient. William wanted extensive gardens, fruit orchards, and to produce as much as possible on site. Fortunately, water was the one thing he would never lack. Springs on the property provided clean water year-round, and he quite literally owned the reservoir below. By late 1914, William had acquired all the land he wanted. Now he needed an architect. Willis Polk was the obvious choice. Polk had designed the Webster Street Mansion in San Francisco in 1896 and the Empire Cottage at the gold mine. He understood William's taste, and more importantly, understood how to create buildings that made a statement without shouting. Polk arrived, walked the land, and began to imagine. Willis Jefferson Polk was 57 years old when William Bourne asked him to design Filoli. He had been practicing architecture for 35 years and was one of California's most respected architects. Polk and Bourne had a relationship built on trust. William did not micromanage. He told Polk what he wanted in general terms, then let the architect work. The site demanded a horizontal composition. Building up would look ridiculous on this sprawling property. The house needed to spread across the landscape, anchoring itself to the hillside while taking advantage of views. Polk chose Georgian Revival as the primary style. Symmetry, balance, brick construction, the architecture of colonial Virginia and England. Exactly the image William wanted to project. But California was not Virginia. Polk made critical adaptations. Instead of slate, he specified red clay tile for the roof. The color and material belonged to California's Spanish missions and could handle the climate. He designed in Flemish bond brickwork, alternating headers and stretchers, creating a subtle pattern more interesting and expensive than common bond. The kind of detail that separated serious architecture from mere building. The plan centered on a grand transverse hall perpendicular to the entrance, creating an enfilade, a series of rooms opening one into another along an axis. From the reception room, you could look through the drawing room into the dining room and glimpse the library beyond. European palaces used this technique to create drama and demonstrate wealth. Polk deployed it at Filoli to make the house feel larger and to frame views through the building. He placed entertaining spaces, ballroom, reception room, drawing room, dining room on the main floor, family spaces upstairs, service areas in the south wing. The scale was substantial, 54,000 square feet, 56 rooms. But Polk avoided the grotesque exaggeration of some Gilded Age mansions. Filoli was large, but still felt like a house where people actually lived. Construction began in 1915. The site required extensive preparation, grading to create terraces, foundation work to handle earthquake loads, bringing in materials and skilled craftsmen. They used waste rock from the Empire mine, stone that had come out of the earth when searching for gold. As decorative elements and foundation material, William liked the symbolism. The gold that built his fortune literally became part of the estate. Brick by brick, the house took shape. The Georgian facade emerged. French windows were installed. Chimneys rose in pairs. Inside, craftsmen installed parquet floors in different patterns for each major room. Oak in the ballroom. American black walnut paneling in the library. Carved moldings and plaster ceilings with subtle details throughout. The ballroom would be the largest room, 32 feet wide, 70 feet long, with a ceiling 22.5 feet high. Not enormous by palace standards, but spacious enough for 100 guests to dance comfortably. Agnes Bourne involved herself in certain details. The music room needed excellent acoustics. She was an accomplished pianist and wanted to host chamber concerts. The kitchen had to be functional for staff preparing meals for large gatherings. By 1917, after 2 years of construction, Filoli was complete. The reported cost exceeded $400,000, equivalent to over $10 million today, but still modest compared to some contemporary estates. William had built something impressive without being vulgar. Georgian elegance adapted to California. In September 1917, William and Agnes moved in. He was 60 years old. She was 56. They had perhaps 20 good years left to enjoy what they had created. William stood on the terrace looking down toward the reservoirs in the valley beyond. His valley, his water, his land. He had everything he had worked for. He had 5 years before the stroke came. Filoli was not built for privacy. It was built to be seen. The reception room hit visitors immediately. 2 stories high, paneled in walnut with a grand staircase rising to the second floor. This was where first impressions happened, where Agnes greeted guests arriving for dinner parties or musical evenings. The drawing room served as a transitional space between entrance and dining, with linen-covered walls giving it a softer feel than the walnut-paneled reception room. Then came the dining room, dark-stained oak paneling from floor to ceiling, hand-carved moldings, a table that could seat 24. This was where William demonstrated he had arrived at the pinnacle of California society. But the ballroom exceeded everything else. 70 feet long, 32 feet wide, with a ceiling soaring 22.5 feet. The scale was breathtaking. Parquet floors in quarter-sawn white oak, walls painted pale water green trimmed with gold leaf. 2 massive chandeliers hung from the ceiling, modeled on the ones in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The fireplace dominated the far end, Baroque styling in Michelozzo marble with ornamental decorations showing Hercules and the Nemean lion. This room was Agnes's domain. She was a patron of the San Francisco Symphony and Opera. She hosted chamber music performances here. Her piano stood ready. Guest musicians would perform. Audiences of 50 to 100 would sit in careful arrangement listening to music echoing off the high ceiling. But here is what visitors did not see: the machinery that made it all work. The butler's pantry connected the dining room to the kitchen. The kitchen itself was utilitarian but massive. A 17-foot-high vaulted ceiling helped dissipate heat from cooking. Industrial stoves, work tables, storage. During large events, staff prepared as many as 9 meals a day. Up to 35 staff lived and worked at Filoli. Cooks, housekeepers, maids, groundskeepers, chauffeurs. They worked 14-hour days with 1 day off every 2 weeks. The servants' quarters occupied the south wing. Small rooms, shared bathrooms, basic furnishings. These spaces were not meant to be seen by guests. They were purely functional. William and Agnes hosted frequently in the years immediately after completion. Musical evenings, dinner parties for business associates, weekend gatherings for friends. The house performed exactly as designed. It impressed everyone. It confirmed William's position at the top of California society. But then, in the summer of 1921, everything changed. While Willis Polk was building the house, William Bourne was planning something equally ambitious outside: 16 acres of formal gardens. Not English cottage gardens with romantic disorder, but formal gardens in the grand European tradition. Geometry, symmetry, structure. Bruce Porter got the call in 1917. He was 54, a Renaissance figure in San Francisco's art world, who painted murals, designed stained glass, and created gardens for wealthy clients. More importantly, Porter understood how gardens should relate to architecture. He had studied European estates and understood Italian Renaissance principles, using walls, hedges, and geometric patterns to create outdoor rooms. William and Bruce walked the land together. The site sloped gently upward from the house toward the hills, perfect for creating terraces and changes in level. Natural features, mature oak trees, rock outcroppings, could be incorporated rather than removed. Isabella Warren entered the project in 1917 as the horticulturist. Everyone called her Bella. She had an artist's eye for color and a plantsperson's understanding of what would actually grow. She had worked on gardens throughout the Bay Area. Wealthy clients trusted her judgment completely. At Filoli, Bella's role was specific: choose every plant, coordinate seasonal color, ensure the garden looked perfect year-round. She worked within Porter's structure. He specified where hedges would go and how tall they should be. Bella decided which species to use, What colors would appear in which seasons. The partnership worked because both understood the assignment. Porter provided the architecture. Bella provided the living art. Work began in 1917 and continued through 1922. Creating a mature garden required time. The first major space visitors encountered was the sunken garden. Porter designed it as a rectangular space sunken below the surrounding grade with a reflecting pool at the center. The pool measured 8,000 gallons, substantial enough to feel like a significant water feature. Water lilies were planted. Bella flanked the pool with panels of lawn and planted twin olive trees. Japanese yews enclosed the entire space, clipped to perfect geometric shapes. The sunken garden made a statement: we control water. In California, where water meant power and wealth, an 8,000-gallon ornamental pool was pure luxury. William charged San Francisco residents by the gallon. Here at Filoli, water existed for beauty. From the sunken garden, the axis continued upward through a series of walled enclosures. The high place, the woodland garden, the rose garden. Each space had its own character, but all connected through Porter's architectural framework. Brick walls were crucial. They created microclimates, protected plants from wind, provided structure for espalier fruit trees. They also prevented visitors from seeing the entire garden at once. You discovered each space by moving through it. Porter designed a bowling green, a perfectly flat lawn for lawn bowling, the English game William enjoyed. Clipped hedges surrounded it. No flowers here, just geometric precision. He created a walled garden divided into sections like a giant garden quilt. Bella filled these sections with seasonal displays that changed throughout the year. One of William's specific requests was incorporating Irish yews at Filoli. These columnar evergreens grew vertically, creating living architectural elements. William had purchased Muckross House in Ireland for his daughter, and the estate there had spectacular yews. Bella arranged for cuttings to be taken at Muckross, grown at the Empire Mine Cottage in Grass Valley, then transported to Filoli. 210 Irish yews eventually lined pathways. Every time William walked these paths, he would see plants that connected Filoli to his daughter's estate in Ireland, a living link across an ocean. The gardens required constant maintenance. Hedges needed clipping to maintain their geometry. Flowers had to be dead-headed and replaced seasonally. Lawns needed mowing. Paths needed weeding. By the late 1920s, Filoli employed 12 full-time gardeners. The head gardener, Louis Marconeri, lived on site and supervised the work. Bella Warren continued overseeing the plantings. She visited regularly, making adjustments, ensuring everything met her standards. The garden that emerged was unlike anything else in California. It combined Italian Renaissance structure with English planting traditions and California plants. It looked both ancient and contemporary. It felt European but belonged completely to this landscape. By 1922, the bones were in place. The garden was still young. Hedges needed years to fully mature. Trees needed time to grow. But the vision was clear. William could stand at the top of the garden, looking down past the terraces and walls and hedges toward the house, with Crystal Springs Reservoir sparkling in the distance. He had created what he set out to create, a place of beauty, a place to grow young. Except he was sitting in a wheelchair. The stroke had come during the previous year. Maud was born in 1883, the only daughter to survive infancy. By 1910, she was 26 and needed to marry well. That spring, she met Arthur Rose Vincent from County Clare, Ireland. His family had connections but limited money, the common situation for Irish gentry in the early 20th century. The courtship moved quickly. William and Agnes liked Arthur well enough. More importantly, they wanted Maud settled. The wedding took place in March 1910 at St. Dominic's Church in San Francisco. It was a major society event. For a wedding gift, William purchased an entire Irish estate. Muckross House sat on the shores of Muckross Lake in County Kerry, Ireland. The house itself was built in the 1840s. a substantial Victorian mansion in Tudor Revival style. The estate covered 11,000 acres of spectacular landscape, mountains, lakes, ancient forests. William bought it outright and deeded it to Maud and Arthur. He also promised to pay the annual costs of running Muckross, roughly $65,000 per year, plus an additional $25,000 allowance for Maud and Arthur's personal expenses. The young couple moved to Muckross. Arthur managed the property. Maud became involved in local community affairs. In 1911, she was presented at the Court of St. James, a formal introduction to British royalty that confirmed her elevated social status. For William, the Irish connection meant something beyond securing his daughter's future. Muckross House became a model for what he wanted at Filoli. The estate gardens there featured ancient, massive yew specimens that had been growing for decades. William arranged for cuttings to be taken so identical plants could be grown at Filoli. He visited Muckross several times after Maud's marriage. He walked the grounds. He saw how an established estate functioned. He brought those ideas back to California. But then came the stroke in 1921. William woke one morning at Filoli feeling wrong, numbness in his face, difficulty speaking. Agnes called for doctors from San Francisco immediately. The stroke was severe. At 64 years old, William's body had betrayed him. He survived, but the damage was permanent. His left side was partially paralyzed. He needed a wheelchair. His speech was affected, though his mind remained sharp. For a man who had spent his life in motion, confinement to a wheelchair was devastating. The gardens he had created were still accessible, at least partially. Staff would wheel him to viewing points, but the freedom to explore was gone. William missed Muckross. He missed walking those Irish gardens. He missed seeing his daughter. In 1921, he commissioned Ernest Peixoto to paint a series of murals for Filoli's ballroom. Peixoto was a well-known American painter who had worked extensively in Europe. He created atmospheric Irish scenes, mountains shrouded in mist, lakes reflecting gray skies. The house itself nestled in the landscape. The finished canvases were enormous. They were installed in the ballroom, covering large sections of the walls. Now William could sit in his ballroom and look at Ireland. He could not travel there, but he could see it. Maud visited Filoli when she could, crossing the Atlantic by ship, a journey that took weeks. But her life was in Ireland now. She had responsibilities there. The years passed. William continued suffering small additional strokes. His condition gradually worsened. He remained mentally alert but physically weakened. Agnes cared for him while maintaining the estate. She continued hosting smaller gatherings when William felt able. She kept the gardens maintained to his standards. Every morning, weather permitting, staff would wheel William to a specific spot at the top of the garden. From there, he could see down past the terraces toward the house, with the reservoirs and valley spread beyond. His valley, his water, his creation. He sat there unable to walk, looking at what he had built. In 1929, a telegram arrived from New York. Maud had been traveling back to Ireland after visiting friends in Manhattan. She had caught pneumonia during the voyage. By the time the ship docked, she was gravely ill. She died in Manhattan on February 12, 1929. She was 45 years old. William and Agnes were devastated. Their only surviving child was gone. William was too weak to travel to New York for the funeral. Agnes went alone. Maud's body was brought back to California and buried in the family cemetery on the Filoli estate next to the infant brother who died at birth. After Maud's death, William began selling his holdings. The Empire Mine went to Newmont Mining Corporation. He was putting his affairs in order. He had built an empire, created Filoli, secured his daughter's future in Ireland. Now his daughter was buried in the garden, and he was trapped in a wheelchair. The Irish connection that had meant so much became a source of pain. The ballroom murals showed a place he would never see again. William lasted 7 more years. In January 1936, Agnes fell ill. At 75, her body simply gave out. She died in January 1936. William was now alone at Filoli. His daughter was buried in the garden. His wife of 54 years was gone. He was 78 years old, confined to a wheelchair in a 56-room mansion he could barely navigate. He lasted 6 months. On July 5, 1936, William Bowers, born II, died at Filoli. The official cause was listed as complications from his long-term paralysis and multiple strokes. He was buried in the family cemetery on the estate next to Agnes and Maud. 4 members of the Bourne family are in that cemetery. The estate William built to grow young had become the place where his family ended. The Filoli estate went on the market in 1937. There were no direct heirs. Nobody in the immediate Bourne family wanted to take on a 654-acre estate that required enormous maintenance costs. The property needed a specific kind of buyer, someone wealthy enough to afford both the purchase price and the annual operating expenses, someone who understood what Filoli represented and would maintain it properly. One couple saw something different. William P. Roth and Lorene Matson Roth visited Filoli in 1937. Lorene was the daughter of Captain William Matson, founder of the Matson Navigation Company. The company operated the famous white ships that sailed between San Francisco and Hawaii. By the time of his death in 1917, Captain Matson had built one of the most successful shipping lines in the Pacific. Lorene inherited a substantial fortune. Her husband, William, known as Bill, became president of Matson Navigation. Together, they represented another generation of California wealth. Lorene looked at the gardens and saw potential. She was an accomplished gardener herself. The 16 acres of formal gardens at Filoli were already spectacular, but she could imagine expanding them further. Bill saw a country retreat where they could escape San Francisco's social obligations, a place to relax. The house was impressive enough to entertain when necessary, but private enough to feel like escape. The Roths purchased Filoli later that year. They moved in and began making it their own. Lorene understood what the Bournes had created. She did not want to erase their vision. She wanted to build on it. Lorene gradually refurnished the house with period-appropriate pieces, but her real passion was the gardens. Isabella Warren was still alive in 1937, still supervising plantings at Filoli. She was 68 years old with decades of experience. Lorene approached Bella about continuing the work. The two women developed a strong working relationship. Bella had exacting standards and did not tolerate clients who tried to micromanage. But Lorene knew plants. She understood design. She respected Bella's expertise. Together, they began expanding the gardens beyond what William Bourne had created. Lorene wanted more botanical diversity. She was particularly interested in camellias, rhododendrons, and azaleas, plants that thrived in the peninsula's climate and provided year-round color. The woodland garden area received major attention. New plantings created layers of texture and seasonal interest. The goal was making the wilder areas as interesting as the formal gardens. Lorene also wanted a swimming pool. Not just a small lap pool, but a substantial facility that could accommodate family and guests. The pool was built in 1946. Its placement required careful consideration. It needed to feel integrated into the garden design rather than imposed on it. Bella designed the pool pavilion and surrounding plantings. She also arranged for a section of the Irish yews to be transplanted to create the backdrop for the pool area. The pool area looked like it had always been part of the garden plan. Bill Roth's health began declining in the late 1950s. Like William Bourne before him, Bill suffered a stroke. The pool had been built partly with his rehabilitation in mind. Bill died in 1963. Lorene was widowed at 70. She continued living at Filoli alone, maintaining the estate with the same attention she had always given it. By the 1970s, Lorene was in her 80s. The estate required constant maintenance. The house needed updates. The gardens needed year-round care. She faced the question every owner of a historic estate eventually faces. What happens next? She had no interest in selling to someone who might divide the property or fail to maintain it properly. She had spent nearly 40 years at Filoli. She understood what it represented, not just her own history, but California's history. There was one organization that might preserve the estate properly, the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Lorraine reached out in the early 1970s. The trust was interested. Filoli was exactly the kind of property they existed to preserve, an intact early 20th century estate that told a significant story about American wealth and culture. In 1975, Lorraine Matson Roth donated the entire Filoli estate to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She also provided a substantial endowment to help cover annual operating costs. Her reasoning was simple: Filoli is too beautiful to be private. The estate opened to the public later that year. For the first time since 1917, strangers could walk through the gardens William Bourne and Bruce Porter and Isabella Warren had created. They could see the house Willis Polk had designed. They could understand what Gilded Age wealth had built. Lorraine moved to a smaller home nearby. She lived to see Filoli succeed as a public site. In 1978, a film crew arrived. Director Warren Beatty was making Heaven Can Wait, a fantasy comedy about a football player who dies prematurely and returns to Earth in a different body. The film needed a location that represented ultimate luxury. Beatty's location scouts found Filoli. The ballroom became a gym where Beatty's character exercised. The grounds provided stunning exterior shots. The formal gardens offered the kind of timeless beauty the script required. Heaven Can Wait succeeded commercially and critically. It received 9 Academy Award nominations. The exposure put Filoli in front of an enormous audience, but that was nothing compared to what came next. In 1981, ABC Television launched Dynasty, a primetime soap opera about the wealthy Carrington family and their oil empire. The show needed establishing shots showing the Carrington mansion. They chose Filoli for the aerial shots. Every episode opened the same way: helicopter cameras, swooping over a spectacular estate. The show ran for 9 seasons, from 1981 to 1989, nearly 200 episodes, which meant Filoli appeared in 200 opening sequences seen by millions of viewers worldwide. The effect was strange. The show was supposedly set in Denver. The mansion was called the Carrington Estate, but observant viewers recognized the location. Filoli became famous without most viewers knowing what they were looking at. For an entire generation, Filoli was that house from Dynasty, even if they did not know its real name. The exposure had practical effects. Tourism increased dramatically. People who had seen Dynasty wanted to visit the real location. Asian tourists in particular became significant visitors. The National Trust capitalized on this carefully. They did not advertise Filoli as the Dynasty Mansion, but they did not hide it either. Other productions followed. The Joy Luck Club filmed scenes there in 1993. Television shows used it for location shots. Commercials featured the gardens. But Dynasty remained the primary cultural reference. The Bourne family was long gone by then. William and Agnes were buried on the property, invisible to tourists. Maud was buried beside them. Their story was not part of the public tour in the early years. Lorraine Roth died in 1985, 10 years after donating the estate. She lived long enough to see Filoli succeed as a public site, but did not witness its peak fame. Today, Filoli draws over 400,000 visitors annually. They come from around the world. From China, where Dynasty made the estate famous. From across the United States, where garden enthusiasts know it by reputation. From San Francisco, where families make repeated visits to see seasonal changes. The gardens bloom year-round. In spring, 75,000 bulbs create waves of color. In summer, roses explode in the walled garden, while salvias and zinnias fill the beds. Fall brings chrysanthemums and changing leaf colors. Winter features camellias blooming in the woodland garden. The horticultural staff plants according to historic photographs and oral histories. They maintain the vision Isabella Warren established, and Lorraine Roth expanded. The garden looks simultaneously historic and contemporary, rooted in the past but alive in the present. The house operates as a museum, but calling it that undersells what it represents. This is not a preserved relic. It is a complete Gilded Age estate that survived intact. Most estates from this period were destroyed or drastically altered. Peninsula neighbors of Filoli, the Crocker estate, the Cole mansion, dozens of others, were divided, demolished, or converted to other uses. Filoli survives as extraordinary because it passed from the Bournes to the Roths to the National Trust without ever being divided or sold to developers. The 654 acres remained intact. The ballroom still has Ernest Peixoto's Muckross murals. The dining room retains its oak paneling. The reception room looks much as it did when Agnes Bourne greeted guests. The kitchen shows the machinery required to support elegant entertaining. The butler's pantry reveals the invisible labor. The servants' quarters demonstrate the class divisions that made such estates possible. Filoli does not hide the less comfortable aspects of its history. Modern interpretation acknowledges that this lifestyle depended on low-wage workers, that William Bourne's water monopoly hurt ordinary San Franciscans, that Gilded Age wealth came from exploitation as much as innovation, but it also preserves irreplaceable beauty. Gardens that took decades to mature, architecture that demonstrates exceptional craft, a vision that succeeded completely. The estate sits on land that was home to the Ramaytush Ohlone people for thousands of years before European settlement. Recent interpretation has begun acknowledging this history. The San Andreas Fault runs directly through the property. A bridge on the nature trail marks where you cross from the North American tectonic plate to the Pacific plate. The earthquake fault that devastated San Francisco passes beneath Filoli's gardens. William Bourne built here anyway. He understood the risks. California has always been earthquake country. You build carefully and accept the reality. The National Trust operates Filoli as a self-sustaining nonprofit. Admission fees, memberships, and donations cover most operating costs. Lorene Roth's endowment helps, but it does not cover everything. The estate has become democratic in a way William Bourne never intended. Educational programs bring thousands of school children to learn about history and horticulture. Garden clubs study the plantings. Architecture students examine Willis Polk's design. Historians research the Bourne and Roth families. In 2023, Filoli made international news again for completely different reasons. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping met at the estate on November 15th during the APEC conference in San Francisco. The two most powerful leaders in the world walked the same gardens William had designed. They talked in rooms Willis Polk had created. From William Bourne's private retreat to Hollywood location to diplomatic venue, the estate had lived multiple lives. But it survived because Lorene Roth made one crucial decision in 1975. She could have sold it, divided it, let it become something else. Instead, she gave it away. Too beautiful to be private. Those 5 words saved Filoli. 400,000 people walk through William Bourne's dream every year. They see what he saw. They walk where he walked. They stand where he stood in his wheelchair, looking down at the gardens and out to the valley beyond. His empire is gone. Spring Valley Water Company dissolved decades ago. The Empire Mine closed in 1956. The fortune dispersed, but the garden remains. The house stands. The vision persists. That is what survives from the Gilded Age. Not the money, not the power, the beauty. And maybe that is enough. William built Filoli as a private retreat, a place where San Francisco's elite could gather away from the city. A statement of his accomplishments. A gift to his wife. A connection to his daughter in Ireland. He died there in 1936, buried in the garden alongside his family. Filoli passed to the Roths, who added their own chapter. Lorene expanded the gardens. She maintained the estate for nearly 40 years. Then she did something unexpected. She gave it all away. Today, Filoli stands as California's last intact Gilded Age estate on the San Francisco Peninsula. Every similar property was divided, demolished, or drastically altered. Filoli alone survived complete. The gardens that Bruce Porter designed and Isabella Warren planted still bloom according to their vision. The house that Willis Polk created still demonstrates his understanding of Georgian architecture adapted to California. 400,000 people visit annually. They see beauty created by extreme wealth, but preserved for everyone. The story is not simple. William Bourne built his fortune by controlling San Francisco's water, a monopoly that hurt ordinary people. The Empire mine that funded Filoli employed workers in dangerous conditions for low wages. The elegant lifestyle the estate represents depended on servants working 14-hour days. But Filoli also preserves irreplaceable beauty and a complete example of how California's elite lived a century ago. The Bourne family is gone, their fortune dispersed, their businesses dissolved or sold. But the estate remains because Lorene Roth understood something profound. Some things are too beautiful to keep. Filoli was not meant to be public. It was built for privacy. William would likely be appalled by tour groups walking through his gardens. But William is not here to object. His only surviving legacy is what he built, and that legacy belongs to everyone now. The estate survives, changed but intact. The gardens bloom. The house stands. The vision persists. That is what remains from the Gilded Age. If you visit Filoli today, you will walk paths where William was wheeled in his chair. You will see the ballroom where Agnes played piano. You will stand where Lorraine worked for decades preserving what the Bournes created. You will not see the family cemetery. It is not part of the tour. But you will understand why Filoli matters, why it was worth preserving, why 400,000 people come each year to see gardens and a mansion built by a water monopolist who died nearly 90 years ago. Because beauty transcends its origins. Because places can mean more than their builders intended. Because sometimes the things we create outlive us in ways we never imagined. Filoli is too beautiful to be private.